Hey, greetings everybody, GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On the last episode, we finished off the second part of our Dawn of the Aspects quintet. And we saw Malygos in dire straits in a tar pit. There is this mysterious humanoid that shouldn't exist back then, so it's obviously either a time traveler or a powerful being kind of watching and trying to lead Malygos on. And there's this little crew led by Malygos's rival Kronos, or Koros, who want to kind of take a third option, not fight Galakrond, not make peace, but serve him and kind of be the last dragon standing. So stay a while and listen to this. We're going to start part 3 with chapter 1 of this third part called Path of Horror. Jaina Prowmore left her meeting with the Council of Six, with the subjects of that convocation only briefly still her focus. Her thoughts quickly turned to a more personal matter, one that had intruded more than once during the gathering. Kalak. Even before his recent unsettling behavior had begun, he had filled her thoughts more often than not. Jaina still vividly remembered that kiss, just after he had asked if he stood a chance not only with the other Magi, but more important, with her. She had answered him by lifting her face toward him, and he had responded as she had long hoped. At that moment, all had seemed right with the world, but since his troubled departure, things had gone awry, and now this had happened. I did not know there was a romance between Jaina and Kalak. While Jaina knew that she could not take time away from her duties for a personal matter, Kalak was still the former aspect of magic, and thus privy to many of the secrets gathered by him and his predecessor, especially his predecessor, over the countless millennia. A wealth of magical power that could potentially wreak havoc upon the world was under his control that was slipping more and more with each passing day. It behooved her for that reason, so the Archmage convinced herself, to find out what was wrong with him. But he cuts contact off each time I try to find out more. Simply reaching out to him was not enough. If she wanted to find out what was actually happening, the Archmage had to take a different course of action, and in her eyes, there was only one course. Suddenly eager to return to her sanctum, Jaina picked up her pace. She already had a plan formulating, one that made absolute sense to her, and one that Kalak would probably not like in the least. He was suffocating. Kalak was suffocating. It mattered not that it was the Malygos of the far, far past who was actually the one struggling for breath. Kalak experienced everything that the proto-dragon did, and that made him wonder at that dark moment what would happen if Malygos perished. A part of Kalak knew that such a fate had not befallen his host, but another part of him, the part that most dealt with the immediate lack of air, still questioned whether both of them might yet die. Malygos shuddered as he sank deeper into the cloying tar into which he had been pushed. Kalak expected the proto-dragon to black out, but instead Malygos startled his unfelt companion by exhaling what air was left in his lungs. But what at first Kalak took for suicide was instead the proto-dragon's attempt to save himself. Head pointed up, Malygos used his last breath to unleash frost. The force of his icy exhalation not only cleared the area above his head all the way up, but also cooled the sides of the gap solid. Sucking in the air that filled the narrow passage, the proto-dragon bent his head down and exhaled again. The molten ground froze just enough, exactly as Malygos intended. He broke free and immediately shoved himself up. Below, both Kalak and his host could already sense the ground shifting again. Malygos pressed harder. The passage was too narrow for him to twist his head down and exhale again. If he was to escape, he had to move even faster. The opening beckoned. At the same time, a rumble rose from below. Hissing, the proto-dragon dug in his claws and pushed up the last few yards. He thrust his head out of the passage, then dragged the rest of himself free. The rumble grew thunderous. Although still fighting for breath, Malygos whirled around and exhaled at the opening. The frost covered the hole just as it filled. The ground sealed. Malygos spread his wings and took to the sky as the frozen pit shook. He rose higher and higher, both he and Kalak hoping that the freeze would last long enough. The pit exploded. A molten column shot up into the sky. Malygos managed to dodge the column just before it reached him. He flew as hard as he could in the direction he faced, even though it meant heading in the opposite direction from where he wanted to go. Only when the proto-dragon hoped he was far enough away did he look back. The column appeared to veer toward him, but at last seemed unable to hold together anymore. It collapsed, spilling over the area of the pit and far beyond. Exhausted, Malagos alighted on a ridge and tried to focus. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled over his body, freezing the tar in most places. That done, the proto-dragon shook hard, sending much of the stiffening tar scattering. The effort cost him, though, and he had to use a few more precious minutes to recoup. Kalik felt every bit of his host's weariness and the proto-dragon's increasing impatience. Malagos wanted to follow after Koros, but he still needed to regain his breath. That meant he would risk losing his rival's trail. As good a tracker as Malagos was, the stench of this region mostly masked the other proto-dragon's scent, very likely what Koros had intended. His breathing finally regular again, Malagos leapt into the sky and headed in the general direction of his rival. There was, of course, no sign of the four, but Malagos pushed on. He constantly smelled the air, seeking some hint of any of the other proto-dragons, but it was another scent that finally seized his attention and gave him a possible trail. It also presented him with the choice of fleeing to safety or racing toward the jaws of death. Galakrond was somewhere far ahead. Part of Malagos shrieked that he should turn back, a part that Kalik found quite sensible, but another part urged the proto-dragon on. Malagos recalled what Koros had said about Galakrond. If Koros had come this far, he would not stop until he achieved his goal, and if that happened, the other proto-dragons would become easy prey for Galakrond and his new followers. Malagos flew low and fast, eyes now seeking any object in the sky. Aware of how swiftly Galakrond himself could fly, Malagos knew that he would have very little chance of escape should the gargantuan proto-dragon spot him. Everything Malagos planned revolved around seeing the behemoth first. Kalik searched his host's mind for details of what he planned and quickly discovered that Malagos' strategy consisted mostly of finding Galakrond and taking it from there. While Kalik was well aware of how adaptable the future Spellweaver could be, seeking out the monster terrorizing the land was, to the blue dragon, insane. However, as always, the choice was not Kalak's. He could only pray that history would be as he recalled it, and he was questioning those recollections more and more with each vision, and that Malagos would survive. Survival instinct did not seem a trait of his host as the proto-dragon pushed harder and harder. That's not true. He just did it to escape. Almost as if eager to confront Galakrond face to face. The landscape changed more than once as Malagos followed the behemoth's odd and unnerving scent. In addition, the fresher the trail, the more Malagos began to notice the wrongness in that scent. There was a sense of decay, as if Galakrond himself were dead and yet was not. Moreover, there was something else inherent in the scent that to the proto-dragon felt twisted, frightening. Evil was not a concept understood much by Malagos' race, but Kalik recognized that it was that very notion that his host sought. Whatever Galakrond had once been, and Malagos' memories indicated a past in which the Leviathan had been thought of as almost benevolent, he had crossed to a darker path at some point. Much like Deathwing, Kalik thought with growing horror, but in some ways worse and more primal. Why this had never been passed on to the Blue's own kind plagued Kalik despite his own trials. What had made the original aspects and the other first dragons agree to keep this terrible era a secret from the generations to come? Malagos came to a sudden halt. Kalik belatedly sensed that mixed in with Galakrond's ever-fresher scent was a trace of another scent Malagos recognized. Not Koros, but one of those with him. The blue and white proto-dragon banked following that scent. Although the essence of Galakrond still prevailed, the other scent began to take on more freshness. Other smells joined it, among them Koros's. Then another fouler odor caught Malagos' attention. He immediately descended. A pair of undead proto-dragons dropped down from high above. Their claws just missed rending Malagos' wings. With ragged hisses they pursued him to the ground. Through his host's eyes, Kalik sought out some place from which to better defend himself, only to bitterly recall that he was not in command of the body he inhabited. Had he been, a natural stone arch to the west would have been his choice of destination. Malagos headed for the arch. Kalik could not be at all certain whether Malagos had made the same choice on his own, or whether the proto-dragon and he somehow had been for a moment as one. Kalik settled for hoping that the arch would prove the correct decision. The two undead were right on their tail and gaining. Malagos darted through the arch, then immediately rose. Spinning in the air, the proto-dragon landed hard, paws first, on the arch. Kalik felt every bone shake from the impact and hoped that his host had not badly injured himself. The arch collapsed. Tons of rock rained down as the two undead relentlessly pursuing passed underneath. The rubble pressed the foremost pursuer to the ground below, where it reduced the corpse to pulp. The collapse did not entirely catch the second undead, but it did throw the fiend out of control. The animated corpse crashed into one of the fragmented arch walls. Already inhaling, Malygos dived after his pursuer. As the undead attempted to right itself, Malygos unleashed the frost. The undead's movements slowed. Malygos increased his velocity. He tore into the fiend before it could recover from the blast, biting into the throat and tearing at the chest. The dry scale and flesh gave way easily, but that did not mean that the corpse ceased its assault on Malygos. The effects of the frost faded. Even with its throat nearly torn out, the undead tried to bite into Malygos' wing. Claws sought his own throat. Thrusting his head into the chest cavity, the proto-dragon clamped down and ripped out everything he could. As he pulled out, the upper part of the body collapsed into the ruined chest. The undead's flailing head snapped up. Malygos finished decapitating the creature, letting the head fall to the side. The ravaged body continued awkwardly seeking him. The proto-dragon shifted and the body stumbled past. But as Malygos did that, a sharp pain coursed through his left hindpaw. He roared in anguish as he fought to shake free the tightened jaws of the head. Blood poured from where several teeth had punctured the proto-dragon's hide. Seizing the jaws, Malygos finally pried them loose. He threw the head as far away as he could. His injured paw throbbed. Blood continued to flow. Malygos studied the wounds, then carefully exhaled. A finer stream of frost blanketed the injured area. The coolness eased the throbbing and helped slow the blood flow, which finally stopped on its own a few moments later. Kalik felt the pain every bit as much as Malygos did. As it was, he was grateful for whatever the coolness did to ease matters. The wind coursed through the region. Malygos sniffed the air. Both noted the clear scent of Koros and some of his followers. Why they had diverged from their pursuit of Galakron, neither Kalik nor his host could say, but the two were of one mind in wanting to find out. Not desiring to fall prey to another trap, Malygos took a circuitous route that also prevented his own scent from drifting back to his enemies. As the proto-dragon neared, a new very powerful scent joined that of Koros and the others. The scent of blood. Very fresh blood. That disturbing scent was followed by the snarling voice of Koros. What the other proto-dragon said was not clear, but he was obviously angry. With great caution, Malygos peered around the rocks. His eyes widened. Koros and his followers were not alone. Between them lay a juvenile male of Alexstrasza's family. There were also two more members of Koros' family, one of them a female, slightly smaller than the group's leader. She had a look of sly pride on her countenance that appeared to both Malygos and Kalik to have nothing to do with Koros' anger, which was evidently focused on two of the other males.
"Do it," their leader growled. "Must be done this way. Galakron did it this way."
The juvenile tried to rise, then slumped. His savage wounds now revealed themselves. His chest had been torn open and his wings ripped apart. Malygos' gaze shifted to the new pair, where he saw that both had claws stained crimson.
Brought him here for you,
interjected the female, taking up Koros' cause.
"Now eat."
Malygos recoiled, and if Kalik could have done the same, he would have. Neither could believe what he had heard. The other proto-dragons remained hesitant. The female looked at Koros, who hissed. In doing so, Koros revealed that his teeth were as red as her claws. Without warning, she lunged at the wounded juvenile's throat. As the other males, except for Koros, recoiled with as much shock as Malygos had, the female ripped out a monstrous chunk of flesh from the side. With great gusto, she tossed it up and let it fall into her gullet. She swallowed it whole, then sneered at the rest of the party. Gross. Malygos wanted to go to the aid of the juvenile, but knew not only that it was already too late, but also that he would simply be throwing his own life away. Kalik understood that, but suddenly wished that he stood beside his host. The two of them together could have taken Koros and his party, of that he was certain. And yet he could do nothing more than Malygos, who shared his frustration and horror at watching the butchery. One of the hesitant males finally lunged. He ripped a mass of flesh from one of the juvenile's arms. As he swallowed it, the rest finally joined in. The feast proved too much even for the stalwart Malygos. He turned away and quietly retched. Kalik experienced every raw emotion as Malygos fought to come to grips with the atrocity Koros had led his followers to perpetrate. Proto-dragons did not devour proto-dragons. Yes, they tasted the blood of their rivals in duels, but even when a duel ended in death, it did not continue with the consuming of the dead. Not, at least, until Galakron. Malygos stiffened. Galakron. Neither Kalik nor his host could have imagined the situation worse than it was. But now it came to both of them that what Koros intended was for him and his followers to become like Galacrond. Shuddering, Malygos forced his gaze back to the scene. The fire-orange juvenile had mercifully died and no longer suffered as bite after bite was ripped from him. Koros' followers quickly left little beyond bones and torn skin. It was Koros who brought an end to the hideous tableau. Muzzle-soaked, he raised the ruined head by the jaw and tossed it aside.
Done. All done. We grow stronger. We see it soon.
Soon, the female echoed.
Soon,
the others repeated. Koros stretched his wings.
Now you see how Galacrond will not eat us. We are like Galacrond. We will be with him. He will not eat us now.
This encouraged even the most reluctant of his followers. The gathered proto-dragons raised their heads and hissed as one. Koros then took off, the female immediately joining him. The rest followed, leaving in their windy wake the jumbled remains of their victim. Malygos almost gave chase, but suddenly found himself drawn to the ravaged corpse. The pungent odor of a fresh kill filled his nostrils. For reasons clear to neither Malygos nor Calic, the proto-dragon bent to investigate the grisly pile. Calic's host sniffed the juvenile's remains and then on impulse seized one of the bones in his jaws. Barely had Malygos done so than the proto-dragon spit the bone out. Even then, though, there was a desire to take it or another piece and work what fragments of meat remained off of it and into his gullet. Both Calic and his host recoiled at the idea, yet Malygos had to fight hard to pull back from the corpse. Hunger filled him, a hunger that revolved around more than merely the eating of flesh. Malygos yearned to taste something else, something that Calic first recognized. Malygos hungers for the juvenile's lingering life essence. The blue dragon could feel the proto-dragon straining not to tear at the remnants in search of what little had not faded away. Stifling a roar of anger, Malygos turned and flew from the spot. At first he simply flew as far as he could from the corpse, even though that took him in the wrong direction. Only after the wind in his face cooled Malygos enough did the proto-dragon finally arc back toward the path Koros' band had taken. Their scents were strong, but both Malygos and Calic noted something different. A hint of the wrongness that pervaded wherever Galacrond flew now tinged their spoor. It stirred the disquieting desire in Malygos again, but Calic's host fought it down, although the strain was greater this time. Malygos picked up his pace. Calic understood that the proto-dragon still did not know what he would do, but at least he had to find out what happened when Koros made his offer to Galacrond. Images of Koros leading the other proto-dragons into a trap where Galacrond would then devour them all flashed through Malygos' and also Calic's mind over and over. A flash of blue-green below caught Malygos' attention. The sharp-eyed proto-dragon spotted the movement near a small creek. While Calic tried to make sense of what his host saw, Malygos landed a short distance away from what he had seen. A rasping sound echoed from ahead. Malygos crept toward it. Something gulped a great amount of water. Seconds later, Calic saw through Malygos' eyes the familiar figure of one of Koros' family. While Calic had no idea which of the band this was, his host recognized the male as among those most hesitant to partake of the gruesome repast. The other proto-dragon did not look well. His eyes had turned a pale yellow and his breathing was ragged. He swallowed another mouthful of water, then coughed up half of it along with some undigested flesh. Malygos' stomach churned and turned. Perhaps he made some noise or movement that neither he nor Calic noticed, for suddenly the other male whirled in his direction. With a savage hiss, the blue-green proto-dragon lunged at Malygos. The sickened male moved with a speed his condition belied, falling upon Malygos. Calic's host barely pulled back enough to keep from having his throat ripped out. His attacker fought with an almost mindless fury that more than made up for any cunning. The slavering maw seemed everywhere. How Malygos managed to avoid being slaughtered, neither Calic nor his host could fathom, and yet the icy blue male succeeded, if barely. Within seconds, Malygos sported a half-dozen slashes, fortunately none of them more than superficial. But the number of wounds and the strain of the struggle began to stir anew the throbbing where the undead had bitten Malygos. The proto-dragons had pounded. Calic felt the intelligent, adaptable Malygos give way to a beast as unthinking as the one that attacked him. A beast that struck with more rage than the sickened male. Now it was Malygos who bit and tore and ripped mercilessly. His great hindclaws cut deep scarlet ribbons in his opponent's hide. His smaller forepaws clung tightly to the other male, keeping Malygos' foe where he desired him. Even when the second male finally began to try to pull away, Malygos gave no quarter. Calic could only watch in growing dread as his host fell upon his weakening adversary. Spittle dripped from Malygos' jaws as he loomed over the other proto-dragon. Malygos was eager for the kill, eager for that, and for something else that Calic only now recognized but could not stop. With one last lunge, Malygos bit through his opponent's throat, tearing off almost half of it in his frenzy. Yet he did not simply toss it aside as Calic hoped, but rather eagerly threw it above his head in order to swallow it. However, as he caught it in his gullet, Malygos came to his senses. Hacking, Calic's host disgorged the goblet of flesh. The proto-dragon stumbled back as dismayed as Calic at what he had been about to do. The bite from the undead pounded harder than ever. Malygos glared at it and stared wide-eyed. Within, Calic also realized what had overcome his host. The bite had infected Malygos, urged him toward the same foul course that Galakron followed, the same course that Koros now also desired to pursue. And although Malygos continued to fight the desire, it remained strong. The nearby body, still fresh, radiated traces of the victim's life essence, which continuously enticed the proto-dragon. With an anxious hiss, Malygos launched himself after Koros again. The proto-dragon concentrated as hard as he could on his rival and the expected encounter with Galakron. Malygos dared not think of anything else. But Calic was thinking long and hard, making a further connection that his host had not. A single bite had nearly driven Malygos beyond saving. How many other proto-dragons had been bitten? How many others would be? And how many of those bitten would fail to fight off the effects as Malygos had done so far, paving the way for a tableau of horror even greater than Koros' betrayal portended? He used tableau again. Whatever reason, he's liking that word when he wrote this chapter. All right, so we got another episode in the pipe 5x5, and this zombie infection is spreading among the dragons now, even if you've been bitten in typical zombie movie fashion. All right, another episode in the pipe 5x5. I thank everyone for watching and for listening, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.